when clients feel bad about caring for themselves. How often does a client say something like, "I feel bad," and proceed to describe how doing something good for themselves comes at the expense of someone else's emotional well-being? Well, clients often come to therapy because they feel stuck. And one way of feeling and being stuck is when you feel like doing what's best for yourself comes at the expense of feeling loved by and or loving towards an important other person. So let's take Clarice, an anonymized client based on my clinical, professional, and personal experience. She was a successful woman in her 30s who spoke to her volatile and prone to anger mother on a daily basis. And she came to therapy for help with feeling anxiety and stress in her life. Well, in the therapy, Clarice made clear that these phone calls were exhausting and stressful for her since her mother could take sudden offense to an innocent comment, and Clarice would have to work extremely hard, mostly on her own, to get back into her mother's graces on the call. Well, we explored what she thought might happen if she didn't call her mother every day, and Clarice immediately said that she would be attacked mercilessly by her mother. So Clarice faced the end of the dilemma of feeling unloved by her mother if she did what was best for herself. And now let's talk about Jonathan, again, another fictional client here, who was a recent graduate from college who came to therapy for help with his anxiety. He had a father who was prone to depression that seemed to worsen whenever Jonathan left to see his friends, go to school, or play sports. And Jonathan had recently moved away from his family to come to San Francisco for a job in software sales and felt extremely anxious when he met with prospective clients. Despite this anxiety, he was very successful and recognized in his company as an up-and-coming talented salesperson. In therapy, we determined that Jonathan had learned to pair his own thriving in the world as something that had felt like it harmed his father. So Jonathan suffered from the other end of the dilemma, that doing what was good for himself came at the expense of feeling like he was being loving towards his father. And I think Jonathan and Clarice have different experiences, but suffer from a similar burden of having to assume responsibility for the emotional well-being of their respective parents. And if you have clients that fall into similar buckets as them, then I think today's video could be useful. I'm going to describe how a type of therapy called control mastery theory, or CMT going forward, understands how this kind of over-responsibility occurs and what you can do as a therapist to empower your clients to challenge and gently put down this emotional burden. Well, my name's Jay Reid, and I'm a licensed psychotherapist in San Francisco, California. And I'm also a member of the Personalized Psychotherapy Institute, which is a part of the San Francisco Psychotherapy Research Group. And this is an organization that engages in scholarship, research, and education on how psychopathology develops and how psychotherapy works. And we focus on how to tailor psychotherapy to patients' particular problems in order to optimize treatments. In essence, psychotherapy that works for everyone is our goal. Well, this theory is a strengths-based depth psychology that asks a series of questions about how the therapy should go. First is, what are this particular client's goals in therapy? What do they want to accomplish? Next is, what are the conscious or unconscious beliefs that may be standing in the way of this client's goals? Third are, what are the sorts of traumas or traumatizing relationships earlier in life which may have led to these interfering beliefs? And fourth is, how can you, the therapist, work with this particular client to offer conditions in the therapy that make them feel safe enough to disconfirm the beliefs so that the client feels freer and safer to pursue their goals? Well, if you'd like to learn more about control mastery theory, I highly recommend that you check out our free ebook that offers 5 of the most important publications on control mastery theory. And you can find the link to the free ebook in the description below, or by clicking here. So why do clients often take on more responsibility than their share for others' emotional well-being? There's a fantastic book called Imaginary Crimes: Why We Punish Ourselves and How to Stop by Louis Engel and Tom Ferguson. And this book lays out why this can happen and what can be done about it in therapy. First, a kid born to a parent that's psychologically compromised in one way or another has a very hard time knowing that it's the parent, not the child themselves, who's to blame if problems emerge in the relationship. So Jonathan carried with him the perception that it was his desire to go off and live his life that made his father so depressed. And we might imagine that this belief got solidified when he was young and noticed his father would grow more despondent when he came home from playing with his friends and seemed to pick up when Jonathan would stay home with his father. And in order to believe that it's sort of their fault, a child has to implicitly assume responsibility for the parent's emotional well-being. And once a child does this, then Engels and Ferguson do a phenomenal job of explaining what can happen next. First, the child can feel like what he or she does or doesn't do can either make or break the parent. Next, if the child does what seems to break the parent, then a torrent of self-blame and guilt can come flooding in. So these beliefs get adopted by a child to preserve a needed relationship with a parent who's unable or unwilling to promote the child's own efforts at achieving the developmental milestones, in their own lives. And Jonathan had to adopt the belief that his independence emotionally injured his father because his father was not providing alternative evidence that he wanted Jonathan to go out there and enjoy his own life. Well, there's a point to all of this origin story about how clients come to feel more responsible for someone else's well-being than their own. And having this understanding can help you as a therapist lay bare the client's logic internally in prioritizing someone else so that they have a better chance at freeing themselves of such really burdensome beliefs. Well, let's take a look at how this understanding helped in the therapy of Clarice. Clarice and I determined pretty early on in therapy that a big source of her stress and anxiety were the daily phone calls to her very abusive mother. And then next we figured out that she held the belief that if she didn't consider the other's needs to be more important than hers, then she deserved to be punished by that person. And it was clear from how Clarice described growing up that this belief was a pretty accurate depiction of what it was like for her as a child with her mother. Clarice knew that when she came home from school, it was going to be a matter of when, not if, her mother would find her to have committed some act of irresponsibility or supposed betrayal and fly into a rage at Clarice. Clarice would then have to accept total blame in order for her mother to calm down and return to some sort of normalcy, regardless of whether Clarice felt that her mother was right or not. Well, in therapy, I didn't spare my reaction of sadness and protectiveness towards Clarice for having to contend with such an emotionally abusive parent from whom she had hoped to find love and acceptance. And this attitude in the therapy seemed to help Clarice feel safer to talk more about what it was like for her to have to squelch all of her own needs in order to tiptoe around her mother's needs so much of the time. I would emphatically validate Clarice's statements that she always felt anxious around her mother and shortchanged in her right to be a child who could be carefree at times. Next, I'd challenge Clarice's reluctance to protect herself from such treatment today by continuing to have these draining phone calls with her mother. And a big part of this challenge was offering Clarice that three-step explanation of how she had to take responsibility for her mother's emotions in order to survive her childhood, or else. And to explain to Clarice how the current guilt and badness she would feel if she stopped calling her mother reflects that erroneous assumption of responsibility that really she never should have been required to assume. And I don't mean to make the process of therapy seem like it just amounted to this sort of exchange of information. We developed a working therapeutic relationship that really, I think, afforded her that immediate experience of having her own feelings matter, be of interest, and be respected. So over time, these elements led to Clarice feeling safe enough to reduce the number of times she called her mother until she only spoke to her mother on a monthly basis. Well, I hope that kind of illustrates how a client who is assuming more than is necessary responsibility for others' emotional well-being can both be empathically understood and gently and incrementally and patiently challenged so they eventually get to live a sort of freer experience in their own lives and lead have a freer quality of life for themselves. Well, thanks for tuning in to this week's video on making psychotherapy work for your clients. We welcome your thoughts in the comments section below and hope you'll consider subscribing to the channel to get alerts when new videos are posted. And a new video will be posted next Sunday. Take care.